We're live in a minute. It's showing. Okay. Fantastic. All right. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Crystal Daynard, and I am an employment specialist at Stride in South Halton. And we are happy to be joining you today on Bell Let's Talk Day. I would love to introduce some of my companions that are with me today. So I'm going to go ahead and start with Nicole because she is next to me on my screen.
Well, hello and happy Bell Let's Talk Day to everybody. So happy to be here. I am an employment peer mentor in the North with Stride, and I will pass it to Janet, who's next to me.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm really excited to do this. This is my first time going live, so bear with me. I'm a pre-employment specialist in the South Halton area of Stride, and this should be really exciting. You're next.
I guess that is me. So hi, my name is Matt, and I'm a youth employment specialist with Stride in North Halton, and very excited to be here and talking about mental health today for part of the Let's Talk Day.
Perfect. So thank you everyone for joining and tuning in. We do have Delia behind the scenes who's going to be moderating our chat and letting us know if we have any questions. So please, by all means, let us know if you have questions. Today is the day to talk about mental health. So as Nicole said, today is Bell Let's Talk Day, which is a massive initiative that is coast to coast and has been in place for, I believe today is the 11th anniversary of it. And Bell has done a tremendous job in bringing to the forefront of most conversations talking about mental health. And that is something that is very near and dear to our heart. So just to kind of give you a little bit of idea who we are, Stride is a community mental health agency that focuses on supporting individuals who struggle with mental health and or addictions around employment. We serve clients in the youth program all the way to adults from Halton, all areas of Halton, Peel, sometimes, you know, outside of our areas, because we are a pretty specialized service in the fact that we do have quite a lot of expertise on mental health. Doesn't mean that we're experts. Anybody who lives with mental health will tell you that they are the expert on their own life, and we definitely see that. We have been around for many, many moons. None of us, though, because we're all very young, of course. But we have been servicing the Halton and area for well over 35 years at this point. And we work very diligently, both with employers and employees, to better serve their mental health and try to break down some of those barriers. So today, we really wanted to take the opportunity to discuss what is mental health? How can it be affected? What is going on with COVID in people's mental health? And try to answer your questions. And as Janet said, this is the first time I believe any of us have ever done absolutely anything like this. So, all right, here we go. Deep breaths, okay? We're nervous, we're a little nervous, so we're just gonna take some deep breaths. This is something that we, you know, sometimes often do when we're working with our clients or in staff meetings as a way to just kind of ground ourselves. Because anxiety is a real thing, obviously, performance anxiety, whatever you want to call it. So let's just take some deep breaths, okay? So breathe in and breathe out through the mouth. Let the tension go, okay? Breathe in and breathe out. Quick little trick, you can do this at any time, anywhere, and not draw attention to yourself, and it will automatically lower your heart rate and bring you peace of mind. Okay, so Matt, why don't you tell us what mental health is?
Yeah, so let's kick off the conversation today. So mental health is defined by the World Health Organization is a state of well-being in which every individual realizes his or her potential, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to his or her community. And just to build a little bit on that, it's also about being able to be a part of their community. So what do you guys think about that definition?
So I'm always the first one to speak up when it comes to any kind of like community meeting or whatever. So why would I break that tradition now? Mental health is so much more than whether it's an absence of something. It is something that everybody has, I believe. And it is something that, depending on your situation or the event or where you're at in your life, it can go up and down. A lot of things that we talk about when we talk about journeys in mental health, and I'm sure Nicole will refer to this as well, is life is not a straight line from A to B. There's ups and downs, there's valleys, there's all of these peaks and ponds and whatever environmental stuff is going on out there. But it is so important that we treat mental health the exact same as physical health, because you can't have one without the other. That's my belief.
And that's such an interesting, thank you, Crystal, for sharing that. And that is so true, which is that we all do have mental health, because mental health is no different than physical health. Mm-hmm. We all have it. It's health. It's looking after ourselves, taking care of ourselves. Sometimes we find people use mental health and mental illness interchangeably. And when we talk about diagnosis, that's the focus on the illness, on the diagnosis portion of it. But what we like to talk about is that mental wellness and that mental health perspective, and understanding how the little things that we can be doing to look after ourselves, to take care of ourselves and look after our wellness. Nicole, do you want to add anything in there?
Absolutely. And I can't agree more that everybody has mental health. We know the statistic is 1 in 5 have mental illness, but 5 in 5 have mental health, because it's something that we all struggle with. Stress is mental health, and we will, of course, be talking a little bit about that as well. And maintaining wellness. And I think that's the overall goal, right? Is maintaining wellness, whether that's physically, mentally, spiritually, socially. There's so many different components. And I think that's so important to be mindful of, especially when talking about mental health. And like Crystal said, it's not a straight line. And the journey of recovery, or the journey of wellness, as I like to call it, is a roller coaster. It's up and down. You might have setbacks, you might experience different things, but at the end of the day, you're always going to propel forward.
Thank you.
What I find really interesting is, like you said, Matthew, we need to keep our physical wellness up to speed, but we neglect our mental wellness or our mental health. I think primarily because we're not aware when we're physically ill, or there's a concern. It's either associated with pain, which brings it to our attention, that causes the awareness, or an inability for something to function properly physically. So mental wellness, I think, all begins with an awareness. Finding that one thing that you recognize as, okay, this might be the beginning. So it's harder to recognize, but once we do, mental wellness is on the way.
Yeah, and I see we have a question that came through, which is, what are some things we can do to help with our mental wellness throughout the pandemic? And I think that's a great question, and we're actually going to be talking about that a little bit in more detail later on in the conversation. But just now, off the top of our heads, I think one of the biggest things we can be doing, and personally, I've been doing it a lot with myself, with my family, as well as even with some of the individuals that I support, are mindfulness activities. Utilizing technology is a huge leap forward right now that we have that didn't exist before. There are some amazing apps out there that you can use that will teach you some of those mindfulness. It can be as easy as what Crystal led us through at the beginning of the chat here, which was that breathing exercise. Such a simple thing that we could do to just ground ourselves and refocus ourselves. Meditation, a lot of people don't realize that you can actually meditate for just a minute or two per day, and what a difference that can make to help kind of, again, refocus and reground ourselves. Did anyone else want to jump in with maybe some strategies that you're using?
I'm watching a lot of Netflix. I don't know whether or not that's actually healthy or not. Maybe not the copious amounts that I'm watching, but it is something that I often talk quite daily about with the people that I support around how do we do things, especially when we can't go out into the world, to go to the gym. I don't do that, but other people do. Go to the gym, or go to the library or to a bookstore, or go to see friends. It's quite challenging right now. And so trying to balance our own mental health while we're trying to take care of ourselves, our families, our community at large during something such as this, which is unprecedented in our lifetime, of course, right?
And any of these questions and comments we're making, we'd like to again invite our members of the community that are watching right now on Facebook to, and even after, even if you tune in after we're done the live and you watch, please add your comments for what you're doing for yourself and for your family and those around you, and ways that you're finding that you can do to keep that focus on your mental wellness. So, yeah.
Right.
What I'd like to do is just do a quick chat about a few interesting stats, and we'll do it kind of in a true or false type activity that are, some of these you may have heard previously, some of them are more common, some of them not as common. And please, again, through either the Facebook chat, or if any of my coworkers want to jump in here, please feel free to jump in. So the first one I wanted to talk about, which we hear quite a lot, is true or false. People with mental illness have a tendency to be violent. So what does the group think about that question?
Absolutely not.
Not true.
Yeah.
Absolutely not true.
Yeah, and that's correct. It is 100% false. The Canadian Mental Health Association has actually reported that as a group, individuals who identify as living with mental health concerns are no more violent than any other group in society. And in fact, the majority of crimes are not committed with people who are living with mental health. So it's an interesting stigma that exists that we really need to work harder to tear that stigma down.
I think it's an interesting point you bring up, Matt, around this. And obviously we could have a whole conversation about media representation and what the movies show and how our stereotypes are perpetuated because of these kinds of things. But you're right. People who live with mental health and or addiction challenges are more often than not actually victims of abuses or crimes or anything like that. And it is quite sad, but I think conversations such as these can actually help in making sure that people understand, what is mental health, what isn't, how can we help other people, how can we even recognize that somebody is struggling, having those conversations. And that's what we're doing today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. And another stat that stood out to me, so again, true or false, just 50% of Canadians would tell friends or coworkers that they have a family member with a mental illness. And what does the group think about that?
I think that could be fairly accurate because there is so much stigma, which we will get to a little bit later. But because of that fear of that judgment, I think that statistic is probably fairly accurate.
Yeah. And that's the unfortunate part. 50% of Canadians would tell friends or coworkers that they have a family member with mental illness, compared to 72% that would discuss a diagnosis of cancer, and 68% would talk about a family member living with diabetes. So it's interesting how we're more willing to share those conversations surrounding our physical wellness. But when it comes to our mental wellness, there's still a lot of work to be done. So,
do you think it has anything to do with the fact that mental illness or wellness is considered an invisible disability?
Yeah, I think that is 100% it. And I also think, too, some of it could also be our understanding surrounding mental illness as well, right? It's ever changing. But I will say, where we see a lot more of that willingness and openness to discuss that, unsurprisingly, this day and age is with our younger population. So, and they really are leading the charge here. So as adults, it's our responsibility to continue to open our minds to it and to listen, to learn, and continue to be those advocates, right? So.
Okay. Matthew, I have a question. What do you do when people believe it is used as an excuse?
So that's actually quite a common one. So again, in my professional career, I see this quite often where we might hear parents, when we're working with younger individuals, say, well, make sure that you're hard on this person because they're lazy, or they've used their mental illness as an excuse. They say they have anxiety, but they're fine. And that's where we really need to have those conversations and engage in those conversations to educate. It's all about education and understanding that anxiety is not laziness. Depression are not laziness. So
I think that's a great question, Janet. Absolutely.
Just another stat to talk about quickly. So again, we look at in 2008, 46%. So this is a little bit of an older one, but in 2008, 46% of Canadians thought people use the term mental illness as an excuse for bad behavior. So a little bit along what you were saying there, Janet, which again, when we look at that, we know that is completely, inappropriate to be saying. But unfortunately, in 2008, that was a true stat. 27% said they would be fearful of being around someone who suffers from serious mental illness because it could lead to violence or another type of bad behavior. And really, really fortunate statistic and stigma there, and it shows. And while things are, these conversations are helping, and we're definitely making leaps and bounds as far as our movement forward, there is still a lot of work to be done. So,
well, and I think that speaks a lot to the stigma of everything, right? And stigma is a very real thing. You mentioned earlier, Matt, about people are more likely to talk about having diabetes or cancer, and that absolutely is not to negate that those are very serious illnesses. And unfortunately, our society we're just dealing with so much. But think of 25, 30 years ago, cancer wasn't talked about, where now it is. And as it should be, because these are things that affect our communities, like our livelihoods, and it affects everything. And mental illness is no exception when it comes down to it. And so breaking down the barriers and stigma, which I think Nicole is actually going to talk about, is really important. So
there may be some inappropriate behavior associated with it. But if we want to dig deeper, that behavior is probably caused from frustration because they're not been given the support or provided the support that would help them manage it, or whether it's medication or therapy or whatever it may be. So can you only imagine not being well and not receiving the help that you need and being so frustrated you don't know what's wrong, but something is wrong.
Mhm.
Absolutely. And behavior is a message, right? It's something that we use to decode, right? So every behavior, everything that we see is a message that's trying to be communicated in some way. And I think that's so important to be mindful of, because someone may not be able to articulate it verbally, but can do so through action. And granted, some actions may not be the most positive or accepted, but it's the way for that person to get their message across so that they can be heard, understood, and supported.
Okay.
I think those are great points, right? And I think as that also takes us into the fact that as a society, we really need to push ourselves to be mental health allies and really, become, we talk about allyship in a lot of areas, and it's interesting that we don't talk as much about being mental health allies as we should, and really helping empower individuals and helping them find their voice there. So
I think that's a great point, Matt. And I like along that line, I want to thank everybody who's joined us for our first live event here. Thank you for joining us because we bribed you, or you just wanted to learn more about mental health. I'm kidding. I don't have any money. And maybe it's just you want to learn more, or you want to have a conversation but don't know how to start. If there's anything we can do to help that, please ask, message us. Like we can figure it out together. That's what we're here for. Nicole, do you maybe want to talk a little bit about stigma? How do you feel about that?
Absolutely. So I guess I'm going to start with throwing out a few things that I've heard. I've heard things like, you're crazy, you're so lazy, snap out of it, to get over it. I think those are some examples of stigma. And to define stigma, it is the attitude and discriminations, the behavior that results from the negative attitude. So that could mean thinking less of a person because of their condition, which can make people feel unwanted and ashamed for things that aren't their choice or fault. So, which surprisingly and not surprisingly enough, dealing with stigma is harder than dealing with the fact that you have a mental illness because you're worried about being judged. And before I continue talking about the impact that stigma can have, can any of you guys, any of my fellow lovely coworkers here, think of any other forms of stigma that you've encountered or heard as we're all in the field?
Yeah. I have experience working in a few different settings, and I think back to the days of working in more of a residential setting, and having staff coming from all walks of life. And it's interesting because even within this field, you'll hear other professionals who will sometimes make judgments based on someone's physical appearance. So a staff may come in and they look a little, their hair might be a little messy, and maybe they haven't shaved in a few days, or maybe they're, there might be like a stain on their pants or something else. And the question then immediately becomes, they must be really dealing with some stuff at home. Something must seriously be going on. Maybe they shouldn't be here today. Are they going to be able to cope with what's going on? And it's interesting that again, you hear these things. These are not unique one-off things that you hear. You hear this more and more from people, the judgments and whatnot, when in reality, it's interesting how we do that.
or often that they're less competent.
Yeah.
So let's not set our standards too high because, they're dealing with, they're a little crazy, right? So let's not set our standards too high. We're not going to give them a lot to do, or we're not going to give them, a better position within the organization. We're just going to keep them right here where we can keep an eye on them. Meanwhile,
let's be sensitive around the person. Don't
yeah,
give them direct feedback because that individual might not handle it well. And
They might go postal.
yeah.
Right. And I'm using that in air quotes, and I'm smiling because those that are on the screen, we recognize how damaging that can be. I often see things on social media that are super funny, but in the context of dealing with mental health, talking about people being crazy or, like they're going to go postal or they're going to lose it, that connotes a certain image and a certain type of behavior, which, as we've been discussing, is not the most positive of things. And Nicole, you were asking about language.
Yeah.
One of the things that I personally struggle with is when people identify people by their diagnosis. So, yes. Janet, you are schizophrenic. Matt, you are bipolar, right? Like that reduces who you are, your entire being, down to a set of very gracious parameters in order to help diagnose and within the medical field and all of that. But people are so much more than a label and something that goes around. Honestly, I would have a whole bunch of labels that I would have to walk around with every day. I should just get a shirt made because I would run out of paper every day.
But it's interesting what you said there, Crystal. And I think what's really interesting, and to build on what I said earlier and to build on what you just said, is how we make those, we also tend to make assumptions of, who a person is and what they might be, facing or not facing based on physical appearance, based on things we've heard, things we suspect, oh, that individual always seems sad. They must be depressed. They're always walking around looking sad, or things of that nature. So.
And definitely, right? And that's one of the reasons why someone who's struggling may not reach out for support. So when someone worries about how they're going to be perceived or judged, it can definitely impact their ability to get help. So for example, so when you look at me, you see this bubbly, outgoing, sarcastic, I've been told, type of person, and not from anybody in this room. It's just other people in my life would probably define me that way. And but what you don't see is that I struggle with depression, I struggle with anxiety, and I struggle with obsessive compulsive disorder. But you can't see that just by looking at me, right? So, and it's frustrating because when I think of, the stigma that I've experienced, I often hear, you don't look sick, you look fine, suck it up, everything's good, and get over it and just do what you need to do. And that itself, as Crystal and Janet and Matt have all touched upon, is so debilitating because then it makes me want to hide parts of myself and not be my authentic self, where I worry about, okay, someone's going to see me be sad. They're going to think that this is going to happen, or they worry about telling me something, right? But I think the biggest thing is just because I have a mental illness, it does not make me my mental illness. It's just part of who I am, not the whole thing. And I think that is so important to note on this. And I think that's, without rambling, because I can ramble, everybody knows I'm very good at rambling. But without rambling, that's why we're all here today. That's why we're having this conversation, because a person is so much more than their mental illness. They are smart, they are funny, they are courageous, they are a family member, a friend, a sister, a brother, a cousin, a this or that. There's so much more to their identity.
Thank you, Nicole.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
We are not defined by our diagnosis.
Not at all. It's part of who we are, but it is not who we are. It's part of our journey.
Can I ask you something, Nicole? Sorry,
yeah.
I realized, Janet, you're just going to raise your hand, but I'm going to jump in front of you like I usually do. Do you feel comfortable disclosing that? Like, this potentially could reach millions of our followers on social media.
And millions.
And you have just allowed yourself to be, I don't want to say allowed, like you're giving yourself permission, but you have become very vulnerable and transparent about who you are and what you struggle with. Are you not worried that that could kind of come back and bite you in the butt?
You know what? I was.
Okay.
It's something I've wanted to talk on social media about it for years. And I was like, okay, I'm going to do it. I'm totally going to get a video. I'm going to talk about my experience. Like, I have my script ready and I'm all set to go. And then I'm like, no, people are going to judge me. People are going to judge me. Potential employers could judge me. There's so many different aspects, but I'm at that point in my wellness journey that I don't really care. I've learned that talking about it is more beneficial and can reach so many more people than hiding it. And I think that's the biggest thing, is this could have such a vast positive impact for so many different people in so many different aspects. And it's a conversation that needs to be had.
Well, that's like, yes.
I applaud you. Absolutely.
Well, thank you.
That's like keep making it a secret. And we think of secrets as, hush, hush, don't tell anybody. It makes it feel bad or it makes it feel wrong. And sharing this information, if people are going to judge, if you have motivation in you or the emotional strength, you use it as a teaching or a learning opportunity.
Absolutely.
We had another question come in, and this would be a good question. I'll open it up to the group, but Nicole as well, if you want to maybe chat a little bit about this. So the question was, how can someone seek help if they feel that they are being judged or being felt less than?
Oh, that is such a good question. I think when I think about seeking support and seeking help on my journey of wellness, I think of what's going to help me move forward and what's going to help me maintain my wellness. And I think that's the biggest thing, right? So there are times that I have felt less than, and I'm like, I'm not going to reach out for support. No one's going to help me. No one's going to listen to me. People are just going to judge me. But then you meet these wonderful people who change that perspective for you. It could be a friend, it could be a counselor, it could be employment specialists, peer mentors, pre-employment specialists. Not plugging Stride, guys, sorry. But it's true. It could be it could be in so many different capacities, right? So when you're seeking help and you feel like you're less than, just remembering that that's not how everybody's going to react, right? That you're going to find that one person who changes that narrative of I'm less than, I'm not worth the support, to I'm being heard, I'm being validated, and I'm being valued. And I think that makes a difference.
I think that's a really strong point. I often talk with my clients about holding space for them. And I like to use that term because sometimes people don't necessarily have the ability or the confidence to have that hope that they can see themselves in a different light. And so I am happy to hold that space for them because I believe in people. And I think the mental health system is a wonderful place to live and to spend time. It can also be incredibly frustrating. We are very lucky in Halton Region. We work within the Mississauga-Halton-Lynn, and so we have an organization, a centralized organization called One Link, which is comprised of several different mental health and addiction agencies that focus everywhere on counseling to housing to employment support if people are identifying with mental health. So sometimes system navigation can absolutely be a hindrance because you don't know how to reach or what help you absolutely need. And another plug for Stride, because let's face it, this is what we do. We also believe in something called the no wrong door policy. So if somebody shows up on our doorstep and employment is not necessarily their focus, it doesn't mean we're just going to turn somebody away. We are going to connect them with the right service. And I think that's really important because as somebody as well who has lived experience with mental health, it is very difficult when you are in that I can't see up, I am completely hopeless, I am not seeing the future. So it's just that much more difficult. And so I'm very proud of Stride that we are such an organization that cares for our community in a way that if we can't help you, we are absolutely going to find the help for you and help lead you to it. Because nobody should have to struggle alone. So it's our job to help facilitate that.
Fantastic. And yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think the other thing too that we as individuals can do, both in our personal lives and our professional lives, is just helping to change the narrative and the language. So when we hear someone in the break room talking about, oh, so-and-so's just lazy, they're not doing, as much work as everyone else, and they're always late and things like that, starting to have those conversations, starting to change the narrative. Or if you hear, well, they're just, they say they have anxiety, so don't put any pressure on them or they might crumble, again, because what happens is if an individual is facing some mental health challenges, and they hear someone being an advocate without a face being attached to it, that immediately they start to see it as, maybe I can talk to this person about what's going on. Maybe I can let them in because they seem safe. So making it clear to indirectly to the people that are around us that we are allies and we are advocates. Sorry, I noticed that we missed a question that came in, so I sincerely apologize to the person that asked it. And the question again, I'm going to put this to Nicole, but as well to the group, which is, what's the difference between anxiety and stress?
I think that's such a wonderful question. And I think that's such an important question. And I think depending on who you ask, everybody's going to have a different definition. Because while there is the DSM-5 version of what anxiety is, that's not how everybody identifies, right? So stress is, let me give you an example. Schoolwork. Schoolwork. Stress might even be, doing this live Zoom. It's a little stressful and anxiety inducing, but we're doing it, right? So stress is something that, and I'm not going to be able to word this properly for some reason, but stress is something that occurs and you can move through it and it manifests, and it might be short term. You might still have long-term stress, but generally it does go away and it's not as persistent. Whereas anxiety is far more persistent, right? So you could have it for months, right? So, and I'm reading all these things, but stress is a response, right, to a threat in a situation, and anxiety is a reaction to stress, right? So how to differentiate between those? And I think I'm going to pass it to some of my colleagues because, again, I can ramble. Everybody knows I can. So I am going to hold the space for everybody else.
Yeah, I always like to look at it this way. Stress can have, things can bring on stress. We can define as, oh my gosh, I have homework, I have, client meetings, I have this I have to do, I have that I have to do. It's giving me stress. Anxiety doesn't always have something that brings it on. And that's a big difference that you have. We often hear, even in our field, we often hear people say, what causes your anxiety? I can tell you right now, in the history of asking someone what causes their anxiety, and them being able to say, well, thank you for asking. Let me tell you, my anxiety is squarely caused by A, B, and C. It's not as clear cut as that, right? So that for me is one of the big things I look at is anxiety. Nicole's definition was perfect. Anxiety doesn't necessarily have a starting point. It doesn't necessarily have, well, this happened and now it's going to cause my anxiety to get worse. Versus stress, you can pretty often identify what's causing stress
Yeah.
in your life. So,
Right. I could be
I think it's important. Sorry, Nicole, but I do also think it's important that stress doesn't always have to be something that's negative that's happening to us. Right?
Yes.
Like things like moving to a new home could be quite positive, or having a child, having a work anniversary, or graduating from a program that you've worked really hard at. These things are all very positive, but it's how we deal with it. And what I would consider stressful, Matt, you may not consider stressful. What causes my anxiety to spike, Janet, may not cause your anxiety to spike. And I love that Nicole talked about it in a way that it is very individualized, because one of the things that I do when I'm working with individuals is, okay, you tell me that you live with depression or anxiety. I can tell you what that means, but I want to know, how does it affect you? Because we are all individuals who bring with us our own lives, our own histories, our own baggage. So what does that look like in our real life, and how can we help other people? And I always use the example of anxiety feels like there's a bear in front of you all the time and you can't do anything about it.
I
But we
love that.
can, and by talking about it and breaking down these barriers, right?
and I don't know about anyone else, but before these strange COVID times we find ourselves living in now, family vacations were a huge stress point. So,
Okay.
sorry, Nicole, if you'd like to.
No, I don't think there's too much more to add. I think it's a little bit funny too, not funny, haha, but funny in the sense that you could just be watching your favorite show and all of a sudden anxiety is coming on, right? And you could be having a good, relaxing, fun time, and all of a sudden, for no reason at all, maybe your palms get sweaty, maybe your breath quickens, maybe you're having racing thoughts, maybe you're watching all these things happen, and it could be for no reason at all. But as you guys know, we can all ramble.
Yep.
We love to ramble. We love talking mental health. It's clear that we are all super duper passionate. But yeah.
Well, Crystal, as employment specialists, we come at it from an employment lens. So would you maybe like to talk a little bit about mental health in employment and what that looks like?
Why, Matthew, thank you so much. This is one of my favorite things to discuss. So I think we've pretty well established that mental health is a thing. It's a thing that everybody has. It's, how we adapt and exactly what our circumstances are. And the beauty of it is that the majority of us do have to work in some capacity or another, whether it's paid work, working from home, like the majority of us, whether you're raising a family and having to live with mental health, or, you're trying to figure stuff out. And there's a tremendous amount of research that is going into how to manage mental health at work. And so, as I mentioned earlier, Stride is an organization that focuses on supporting people around, employment, either opportunities or barriers or just support. It's not a clear cut, cookie cutter kind of organization. So Janet, I'm going to use you as an example because you're sitting beside me on the screen. So if Janet came to me and said, I'm really struggling in my job right now. I'm having panic attacks and I'm not sure how to manage it. I don't know how to have that conversation. Well, it's not for me to say, Janet, you need to do this, 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 and this. It's a conversation that Janet and I are going to have around what does she feel comfortable with. So when we're talking about mental health in the workplace, I want to make things incredibly clear to the viewers that are watching. Again, thank you so much for joining us today. Number one, you never have to disclose the nature of the disability to an employer. I super want to be clear, I'm not a lawyer or like a doctor or anything like that, but we have something in Canada and Ontario called the Human Rights Commission. And we have rights that are guaranteed to us based on human rights. And one of them is to be free from discrimination based on age, gender, disability, all of those things. And mental health is a legitimate disability under the code. And it's important to know that employers cannot ask the nature of an illness because it could then come down to, oh, you know, Janet, she's living with schizophrenia. We're really afraid of what's going to happen, right? Now, does Janet, if she needs accommodation, which I'll talk about in a second, does Janet have to tell an employer that she's struggling with anything? No, she doesn't. This also the beauty of all of this is that as individuals, we have the capability to share information if we choose to share it. Nobody can ask that information. So I mentioned the term accommodation, and I realize I'm kind of all over the place, but that's what you got with me. So an accommodation, so Janet, I'm going to pick on you again because like you're looking at me so intently with the pencil in your hair. When I say the word accommodation at work, what do you automatically picture in your head?
I don't know, adjusting something. Well, as in our field of work, or as a, you know,
just in general,
layperson.
Yep.
A opportunity or a necessity for my employer to do something on my behalf.
Okay. So an accommodation is allowing an individual who may not otherwise be considered for a job or need something to do a job have the ability to do it. So I'll give you an example. Most of the time, when we hear the words accommodation, we think things like making sure that there are safety bars in washrooms, or that we have accessible entryways, accessibility to buildings, those types of things, which absolutely are part of the accommodations. Most people don't realize, though, that there are so many accommodations we can do for mental health. And guess how much most of them cost? Zero. Most of them cost next to nothing. So some examples, being allowed time to take medication at work if you need it. And depending on what kind of job you have, for us, maybe because we're allowed to have drinks at our desk or whatever. Working as a cashier someplace, you may need a specific 5-minute break at a certain time in order to take that medication. Easy enough accommodation. Changing shifts, right? Having a straight shift, depending on what people are struggling with. So it's such a larger conversation, but the important thing to know is that people, okay, Janet, let's
a question.
Yes.
That's all well and good.
Yep.
But when you work with the rest, your coworkers or other staff, and they see that I'm getting an accommodation,
mm-hmm.
How do I deal with my coworkers who are resentful, or they want the same thing, or they want to be able to take more breaks or sit on a chair instead of standing for their entire shift? And then I feel uncomfortable, and I feel like I shouldn't be taking them.
You know what? I think that's a fantastic question. Let's open that up. What do you guys think? Bueller?
You guys are awesome. I think that ultimately at the end of the day, we can only focus on what we have control over. So what we have control over are our thoughts, our actions, our behaviors, and what we need. And I think when we start focusing on things that we can't control, like the way others are going to perceive it or think about us or question things, then we get into a very muddy line of, making maybe anxiety a little worse for ourselves and causing more stress. So for me, I think the biggest thing is that I have the right to ask for what I need, and I have the right to that accommodation. And if that's what I need to support myself in that environment to ensure that I am the most effective employee that I can be, then that's what I'm going to do. And I'm not going to worry about how it's perceived by others, because at the end of the day, I need to put myself and my wellness first.
I think that's great too, Nicole. Sorry, Matt. I want to say, because this is a real thing that people come to us with, like, I need to be able to work a straight shift in the middle of the day that never existed before I started here. How do I have that conversation with not only my employer, but also all of the colleagues? And again, it's really about getting to know the person and exactly what situation they're involved with. My obvious thought is, having a conversation and how to have that conversation. Do you want Stride to come in? Because we are very happy to come in and help, with education piece, or speaking to an employer, or working with medical teams to make sure that accommodations are being followed. But at the end of the day, we want to support the person who is struggling. So is that, okay, let's come up with a script, right? Sometimes, I don't know about you guys, but that's what I work on with some of my clients. When people are asking, we talk a lot about anticipatory anxiety, which is something that is very real, because we assume that people are going to be asking questions. It's very common when people are coming back from mental health leave of absences, right? How to address those types of comments. So we role play, we do whatever it needs to be done. And again, it's going to look different for everybody. But I think that's a great question, Janet.
And just one more thing to add to it before we move on. But one of the things that I've heard individuals say in the past is, I don't want to ask for an accommodation at work because I'm going to be seen as being greedy or being selfish. And a lot of individuals, a lot of us in general, don't realize that asking for an accommodation is actually the complete opposite of being selfish. Because when you ask for an accommodation, what you're doing is you're actually trying to one, get what you need to be successful at the job. But the key emphasis there is you're asking for it so that you can be successful for yourself as well as for the company. So again, asking for an accommodation is not selfish at all.
We are all experiencing an accommodation right now. What do we all have in common on the screen? All of us, every single one of us. We are all wearing glasses, right? Which you wouldn't necessarily think is an accommodation, but I would assume for the majority of us that if we took our glasses off, we would not be able to perform our job to the best of our ability over time. Would that be a fair statement?
Yep.
Right?
100%.
So if somebody needs an additional break, or instead of breaking up a half hour, or instead of having a half hour lunch, breaking it up that they can take 5 minutes every hour, right? These are all reasonable things. And this is something that we're very adept at having conversations with around that, because again, at the end of the day, an employer has the responsibility, and there is something called duty to accommodate, which is under the law. I'm not going to get into it here. If anybody wants more information, please connect with us, because we'd be happy to support you with that information. But there's rules, and we can help people become advocates for themselves, right? We will never speak for people. I want to be really clear about that. That is not our job. Our job is to help support people, and we will stand beside people every step of the way if that's what's needed.
Yeah, and that's so important. It's all about empowerment, right? So
absolutely,
and that's what we all that's why we're in the field we're in, is to help empower individuals and help them find their own voice. So just the next thing we wanted to kind of touch base on a little bit today is the effect that COVID has had on mental health and what that means for individuals. Because I've got to be honest with you, if you had have said to me a year ago that we would be in the current environment we're in, I think I speak for myself as well as most people when I say I would have laughed and told you that I don't think you're making things up. There's no way possible that could ever happen. And here we are, from our organization, we've now been working home for 10 and a half months. We're almost at that 1 year mark. And, I don't know about anyone else, but personally, I'm starting to feel a little cabin feverish. So Yeah. So what does that mean to the rest of the group? What do you think of when you think about the impact that COVID has had on mental health? And what are some ways we can keep our mental health up? We talked a little bit about it before, but what are some other ways that we can really keep our mental wellness in a positive space during these times?
I think right now, Matt, it's really, really important to be aware of how much COVID or this lockdown, lock up situation that we're in has really, really, I don't know, sort of just built on top of everything else that we've ever been dealing with, whether it's our mental health, our mental wellness, or our physical wellness. It's just sort of a combination of everything together. And for many, many people are experiencing such detrimental effects. So right now, all we can do is try to get our clients or people to understand to slow down. We can't behave and think the way we did 10 months ago, a year ago. We have to be kinder to ourselves and recognize that we're not structured as humans to be able to receive all this and process it. Something's got to give. And being very supportive of our friends and neighbors, family, co-workers, and saying, you know what, it's okay. It's okay if you're not functioning at, 80%. It's okay if you're not functioning at your normal 110%. It's okay. Take a breath and take it one day at a time. Small bites, and that's the best we can do. I mean, there's, like we did at the beginning, there's a practice. Let's center ourselves. Let's breathe. There are all kinds of wonderful, wonderful practices we can utilize, these little tools. And like Crystal said, nobody even needs to know you're doing it. That will help. That will bring us back. That will help us refocus. But I think that the primary takeaway is to be kinder to ourselves and to each other.
I like what you're saying, Janet. Not because we're in the situation we're in, which is obviously the magnitude of which obviously our generations haven't seen. But I think if you compound people who are already struggling with depression and anxiety and a sense of isolation and loneliness and not being able to connect physically with other people, it's just kind of like a little funny story. I had the cable guy literally come in on the weekend to help fix my internet. And I think both of us were starved for conversation. We talked for 45 minutes, like about nothing, but I haven't seen a face-to-face human to have a conversation with. And he was lovely. His name's Mike with Coach Co, great guy. Thanks for helping. But to be able to have that conversation and have that kind of connection with somebody else is tremendous. And we're adults and we're trying to deal with this. Take a look at all of our kids right now, right? Like people who are like developing their social skills, like their mental health is going right off the rails. And I know sometimes we always, and I'm very guilty of this, we tend to get right into the negative of everything, but I think there's some tremendously positive things that have come out of this pandemic that I think are going to absolutely, and have started, absolutely revolutionize the way that we provide service. I don't know if anybody wants to talk about, things that they've seen online or ways in which mental health, access to mental health has changed dramatically.
Wow, look at us. We're virtual.
There you go.
So, that would never have happened as soon as it has.
Yeah,
had it
I
not
wish
been
we
for COVID.
would have had that stock tip back in the day. But
Right? But I think it's provided more access for people. They may not have a computer, but maybe most people have a cell phone, so you can connect via, the password in a cell phone. So having these opportunities that allow people to connect, I think is great, because it doesn't always have to be in person now. It can be this way, which is better than nothing.
We had another question just come in. It's a really good question. How do you suggest people that are not used to so much isolation manage?
Maybe Nicole, do you want to take this one?
Absolutely. That's another wonderful question. And I think the biggest thing is still finding ways to engage in connections, whether that's phone calls with family or look at the platforms that we have available. We have Facebook, we have Instagram, we have Zoom, Microsoft Teams, Google Meets, all of these wonderful ways that as much as we don't have the physical connection anymore at this moment, and that's hard to deal with, we do have ways to stay connected. And there are a wide range of supports, just like Stride, that are offering virtual groups and workshops that you can also engage in, right? So finding ways to connect with people has opened up in a way that I have never seen before because of COVID. And while of course COVID is hard and has caused that isolation, it has opened up so much more access and so much more doors into the ways that we can connect. And I don't know if anybody else wants to add a little bit to that question as well.
I think like Janet said earlier, like how fast we all pivoted very quickly to going from building relationships with people face to face to all of a sudden literally having conversations and supporting people that we have never seen face to face. And so it's quite interesting. I have quite a few people that I work with who are doing things like online euchre games or groups. Libraries are now doing online discussions for book clubs, or so I'm a huge reader. It was very struggling for me when the libraries were closed, but now they're offering, you can get like book bags, and they literally put in books, and you just go pick them up based on what you like, and being able to offer all of these different kinds of programming. And isolation is very, very hard, and it's going to sound kind of like a cliche, but we're all together in our isolation. I don't know if that makes sense. But being able to reach out and have that conversation, and sometimes people don't have that person to reach out to. So you know what? If you feel comfortable, reach out to us and we can help you connect to services. Or contact One Link.
My daughter found this app where she could actually watch a movie with her boyfriend while they're in separate houses.
Oh, that's cool.
That blows my mind.
He's at his place, she's here. They're watching the same movie together, and each one can pause it. Right? So we can watch movies together.
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of what we're seeing as far as companies adjusting to COVID, as well as the consumer base is adjusting to it. We're coming up with all these new inventive ways of connecting while we're apart, and that's a big part of that, is continuing, as my colleagues here have said, continuing to connect, finding new ways of connecting, because we are all in this together. Sorry, just another question came in, and these are great questions. So again, just want to encourage everyone, if you're joining late or you watch our event after we're no longer live, we would encourage you to leave your comments, leave your messages, send us a message on Facebook with these questions, because one of our team is more than happy, or our entire team actually are more than happy to have those conversations with you. So again, the question coming in, so how do we get this conversation going more often? I find it's easy for people to forget about those with mental health challenges when it's not being discussed on a regular basis. And you know what, that is completely it. And we are also having these conversations of the importance of talking about it more often and looking for new ways to engage on that. Always looking for for ways to start these conversations. And that's always the tricky part. You'll find that most people actually want to talk about these things. They just don't always know how to start the conversation. So it's just becoming a conversation starter.
And I think that's a great question. And then context as well, not only with individuals, with our friends, but in the context of what we do, we are happy to not physically come right now, but we're happy to have conversations with companies and employers and have these conversations, how to help facilitate these conversations. And because we recognize the value and the importance of all of this. And so if you work for a place that you think this would be beneficial for us to have any of these conversations, by all means, let us know. We are happy to put something together and work with individual companies based on their needs. Everything from, what is mental health to how can you create a program so that everybody's comfortable talking about it at your own work.
And make sure that, as well, just not to give us another extra plug here, but make sure following us on our social media, because we very likely will be having more events like this where we go live a bit more to have these conversations, maybe a little more specific on some specific topics surrounding mental health and employment, or mental health and mental wellness, and balancing everything. So again, just make sure that you're following our social media, because we will also share information very regularly, as we do now, about other community events, albeit virtual right now, where the focus is mental wellness. Because as a community, that's what we do, both the Halton community as well as the mental health community. That you'll find that's what we do. Sorry, just being mindful of the time, and we did have another excellent question in. So is there a place to find all the extra resources that are now being offered? And the answer is what we will do is we will work on putting together some of that information, and we will make that available on our social media as well. It will be after the event. It may not be this evening. Today is Thursday evening, so we will, though, endeavor to have that out shortly. So.
At any point, please feel free to go to our website, which is www. I don't even know why I said that, because aren't they all www? Sorry. Stride.on.ca, and you can take a look at what we do and how to connect with us. But if you have any questions about anything you've seen here, you can connect with us directly at info@stride.on.ca, and we will absolutely get back to you if you're looking for something more specific. Sorry, Janet, I saw that you wanted to talk.
We've been talking about people living with mental health and/or addictions and what's going on with them. Can we talk about how we can inform or provide the people who do not live with but want to support someone who does, or maybe just a simple fact to acknowledge it and say, hey, I notice, you're not yourself today.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So how about those types of things? Because I'm sure there's people out there that are like, I do notice, but I don't know what to say, and I don't know how to talk about it, so I'm not going to say anything.
I think that's a great question. There was a commercial a couple of years ago, and I want to say it was Bell Let's Talk, actually, that did the commercial. And it was a commercial of a lady who was calling in and leaving an absent voicemail.
At work.
Calling in sick,
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And then she hung up the phone, and you could see that she just completely deflated because she was just not herself. How often do you, in your daily life, ask somebody, hey, how you doing? How many of us actually listen to respond? Right? What would you do? What would you do if, Janet, you said to me, hey, Crystal, how are you doing? If I said, you know what, like I can't afford my medication this month, and I'm really worried that my depression is going into a spiral. How would you react to that?
Well, Crystal,
I know
what
how
I'd
you
say.
would react, but really, I think a lot of it has to it really has to base on your relationship with somebody. And I think it's such a valid point that you're talking about, because
Yeah.
that's why we have these conversations, right?
Absolutely.
Because not everybody understands mental health. Mental health looks different in every culture, in every context, in every experience.
So what I could say in response to that, I don't, not in the position that I'm in or the field that I'm in, but just as a friend who doesn't know anything but recognizes something, can be, you know what, I would like to support you, or I would like to talk to you about this. I don't know much about what's going on, but I'm here to listen.
And
Right?
sometimes, I was just going to say, Nicole, like sometimes people, they don't want somebody to fix things
No,
for them.
no,
Right?
listening is more than enough, right? Just knowing that you have someone who's listening and even asking, how can I help? You may not understand, the person may not understand, because mental health is so hard and it's so different for everybody and it's so hard to understand. But I think when you reach out and you say, how can I help? How can I support you? I'm here for you. I'm listening. I think those are the Janet, you're fantastic. I just
That's a
love watching
killer for
the hand
me.
go up.
That's a
I think
killer for me when somebody says, how can I help? Because then
Yeah.
that puts the onus on the person who's suffering or not well
Yeah.
to make the other person feel better about doing something for them. And it just makes me crazy. So just saying.
And that's fair, right?
I think one of the biggest things too, when we talk about listening, and I'm sure we're all guilty of it, but as I was just saying the other day to my son, one of the biggest things we can do, we all have one of these, put it away. Make yourself available. Make
Aw.
yourself there in the moment with the individual, right? Because when we're listening to someone, we really have to demonstrate, especially when they're being vulnerable, that we are there
Absolutely.
in that moment. That's one of the biggest, most key pieces of advice that I think anyone can give, is just be there in the moment with the individual. The rest will come.
And I absolutely love that. And just to kind of build on that, we've talked a lot about stigma and its impact and some negatives, but you know what? Throughout my journey, I've learned that there are some positives to mental health. And I'm going to just highlight a few of them, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
But one of them is compassion, right? So 1 in 5 have mental illness, but 5 in 5, again, have mental health. And I think having a mental illness allows me personally in my journey to show others kindness and compassion and be empathetic. And I think allowing myself to maybe not understand what someone is going through, but to understand that the feelings, right? I might not understand, everybody's experience is different. I might not understand someone's experience with depression, but I understand what sadness and despair and hopelessness can feel like. So I think that's something important. And I think hope is another one as well, right? And that one's so near and dear to my heart, because let's be real, when you have depression and anxiety and whatever else you may be struggling with, you may lose hope time to time, right? But at the end of the day, I remind myself that there is so much more to life that I have not seen yet. And there are so many more experiences, so many more people to connect with. And I think that is so important, right? And I could go on and on. I have like 10 things listed here. I'm not going to read all 10 because we just can't. But the last one I kind of want to touch on, and everybody I think during COVID has displayed this, is resilient. We are so resilient, right? And I'm reminded of that through COVID, through experience with mental illness. I am reminded that I might get knocked down, but I always get back up. And there's no way that that's going to change. And I think that I know it's not, oh my God, how do people word it to me? It's not all sunshine and rainbows and butterflies, right? And I love that saying because it's so accurate and it's so true that it's not. And we are all 100% of us. We are going to have our good days and we are going to have our bad days. But I remind myself that yes, I have depression, yes, I have anxiety, and yes, I have OCD, but I would not be who I am or where I am today if I didn't live with those, if I didn't experience what I've experienced. And I think COVID has taught us that too, that we are far more resilient than we believe ourselves to be. And a quote, I'm going to throw out a quote. Some of you who are watching know that I love this quote. I say it every chance I get, but we have survived 100% of the hardest days that we thought we couldn't, and we are still here. And you are all joining us today on Bell Let's Talk Day on Thursday, the 28th, and it is now 6:16, and we are all here together. And I think there's something to be said in that.
Absolutely, Nicole. Absolutely.
So just, sorry.
No, that's okay.
So just in closing, as we come to the end here, quite often we've had the question come up a few times today in the chat, and we always hear it all the time in the nature of our work and everything else. What can we do? What are the first steps that we can take to that? And I think we all have the same kind of answer, which is we can talk. We cannot be silent. We can create that open and welcoming environment, and we can be the change that we hope to see by taking those simple first steps of listening, of having the conversation, and making ourselves be present.
I just wanted to say thank you so much, not only for my esteemed colleagues who have joined me here tonight, but for Stride and our management team for allowing us to just kind of take an idea and run with it, because we're so passionate about things. I want to thank every single person who has joined us, watching us and letting us bumble through our very first live thing. I don't know, I'm thinking we did pretty well. I don't know why we're so nervous, but I do think we did really well. So there's a pat on our backs. And I think for everybody who's struggling out there, we use the word journey a lot, and we use like recovery, and we sometimes use these like really big fantastical words. We can never presume to know exactly what it is that you're going through, but we can absolutely walk with you if that would be helpful. And so I really wanted to say thank you to everybody involved in the work that we do, and specifically I want to say thank you to all of our clients, because without you, we wouldn't exist. But I personally learn so much from you every single day. And for you to absolutely allow us to be part of your journey is completely humbling. And please join us if you need support, if you need to talk. If we're not the right place, we will absolutely find it for you. Thank you again, everybody, for joining us. Please, Bell Let's Talk Day still goes until midnight tonight. Bell will donate 5 cents for every time you use the hashtag on all of the platforms. And for those of you watching us on Facebook, I do want to let you know that we also do have Twitter and Instagram available. And we're getting really good at posting some really fun stuff. So if there's anything that anybody wants us to talk about in the future, or you'd like to see us address, please connect with us and we will do that.
This was fun, kids. Let's do it again.
This was fun.
This was a lot of fun. And we thank each and every one of you for tuning in.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, everybody. We hope you have a great evening, and thank you again for helping us continue the conversation. Oh, Janet's giving kisses. Mwah. All right.
Bye, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.